Elizabeth Ivanhoe. Dr. Ivanhoe earned her doctorate in yoga philosophy from the Graduate Theological Union, and her dissertation research In Search of Sleep, a comprehensive study of yoga philosophy, therapeutic practice, and improving sleep in higher education, examines the integration of contemplative practice within university settings. She was formerly part of the Stanford Living Education Department and joined the Stanford community in 2024 to teach sleep for peak performance and meditation. She continues to teach there in the Office for Religious and Spiritual Life, offering various courses, including yoga for stress management. Dr. Ivanhoe is the founding director emeritus of YogaUSC, previously lectured in USC's mind-body department, where she also served on faculty wellness boards. She has taught yoga since 1995, has been involved in a variety of different public-facing ways related to yoga teaching, including as the yoga columnist for Health Magazine. And her current work bridges traditional lineages and contemporary clinical settings, advancing the role of contemplative education and practice within modern models of health and healing. So we're going to hear from her in just a moment. And I just wanted to mention now, so that I don't forget to mention at the end, that our next speaker in this series will be on Tuesday, December 16th. Good, I don't want to get it at noon, and we'll be in person at our UCSF Osher Center campus at the Mount Zion campus of UCSF. It will be on music and health with Dr. Julian Johnson and Dr. JT Tang. So if you are in San Francisco area and can join us in person, we would love to see you there. So Dr. Ivanhoe, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. I love the nods and the thumbs up signs. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to dive into my slides in just a moment and get into everything. But I wanted to just, before I do, to share with you all that my degree is within the humanities. I've been teaching yoga for 30 years, and I've been really excited to bring these practices into research settings. But the presentation that you see today may look a little bit different from your usual series in this research, which have all been sort of scientifically based. So I'm really interested in bringing these disciplines together. But if you notice some difference in tones and styles, I just wanted to give a little heads up on that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And can you all see it okay? Okay, more nods. Fantastic. So as I mentioned, I'm really excited about bringing contemplative practice, contextualizing it into contemporary healthcare settings. And there's a few points I'm going to try to hit today. Just want to start out with just this clear statement. Contemplative practices can be powerful clinical tools, but their therapeutic accuracy depends on understanding the discrepancy between their original soteriological intent and their contemporary therapeutic application, recognizing the pedagogical shift that homogenized their modern interpretation, and conducting precise technique-specific research to determine how each of these methods differs in individuals and outcomes. So today I'm going to be going, I want to make three distinct points. I want to talk about the evolution from contemplative practice, their soteriological intent, and contemplative therapeutic application. I want to talk about the evolution in pedagogy, how these practices were transmitted for thousands of years, and how they are transmitted and taught and applied today. And then focus on some research opportunities for the future on how we can get more specific and precise in our attempts to measure the outcomes for all of these. So I just want to excuse the not beautiful slides. I want to start out with just defining what I consider contemplative practice, because it's a word that's kind of thrown around and it has many definitions, and those can all be correct. But the way I'm going to be using the term contemplative practice today So I'm mostly going to be referring to practices of physical yoga postures, what are called asanas, the different movements we do in a yoga practice. Most of you would know, have some familiarity of what those are. I'll also be, when I talk about contemplative practice, I'm also including breathwork techniques, and I'll be getting into the specifics of that. And in contemplative practice, I'm also talking about meditation techniques and the variety of those. Now, traditionally, historically in yoga, the term yoga, like if you go to the Sanskrit dictionary, there's over 90 definitions of the word yoga. So traditionally, yoga included yoga and breathwork and meditation was all simply called yoga. But within the last several decades in Western settings, we've kind of divided up where when we say yoga, we're mostly talking about physical practice and breathwork practice and meditation practice. So English in the sort of lost in translation, when the Sanskrit word yoga translated to into English into Western practice, we've divided into these generally 3 subtopics. Now, contemplative practice has a long history that involves many different traditions. Christian Gnostics, walking labyrinths. There's a lot of, contemplative art practices. But for today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the contemplative practice from Eastern and South Asian lineages. So again, mostly focusing on the yoga, breathwork, and meditation. That's what I'll be talking about today. So a little bit of historical context. This is what sometimes I get a little lost going too much into this, so I'm going to try to keep myself reined in. But especially as clinicians and researchers, it's important for us to keep in mind that these practices of yoga, breathwork, and meditation were not developed, were not created for the use of therapeutic applications. These were all developed for the use of spiritual liberation. This was the goal. This was absolutely in almost every nuanced tradition of in the yoga lineage and in Buddhist meditation lineages. The goal was a type of spiritual liberation. In the Hatha yoga traditions, there was a lot of asceticism. In the yoga tradition, liberation, we use the term moksha. In the Buddhist tradition, they use for liberation, the term was nirvana. And all of these techniques were not meant to be an endpoint. The techniques were meant to be vehicles for this experience of spiritual liberation. I'm not going to go too much into what spiritual liberation is, but just so that you get the point. I think what's really important for us to understand is that physical yoga, breathwork techniques, meditation techniques that were all developed with this purpose of spiritual liberation, they were not developed for symptom relief. They were not developed for stress management or pain management. They were not developed to help insomnia. They were not developed to help TMJ. They were not developed for all of these purposes originally. And we're going to start to get into a little bit of that. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't incredibly useful for all of these ways that they're being applied today. But there is a gap in how and why the practices were developed and how we in contemporary culture have been starting to apply them. The health of a human was essential, right? But mostly addressing health issues were done for the purpose of a healthy body can do these practices for longer and therefore reach spiritual liberation. Again, the end goal was not health. Health was a vehicle. This is how it was originally set up. Let me just move this guy here. Okay, great. So as this has moved into Western healthcare, there's been a lot of benefits which people are experiencing. It's helping a lot of people, but there's also some limitations, and we'll be talking about both of those as we go. Important just before I move off of too much of the history, just important to acknowledge that yoga is a UNESCO culturally intangible cultural heritage for humanity, that it is meant to be practiced, that it does have these origins and it is meant to be practiced for this purpose, comes from India, and sort of important for us to kind of keep all of this in mind. So point number one is that the purpose of the practices have changed from spiritual liberation to therapeutic practice. The second point I want to make is the evolution of pedagogy. For thousands of years, these contemplative practices, yoga, breathwork, meditation, these were individual conversations, not classes. And when this conversation changed from individual to a collective curriculum, there were some things that were lost and some things that were gained. And here's what I mean by that. In the yoga tradition, we have a Sanskrit word called parampara, which is means lineage, means continuous flow. And for thousands of years, the practices of yoga, breathwork, and meditation were passed on from individual teacher, we call a guru, to the student shishya. And this relationship of the guru-shishya relationship, the teacher-student relationship, was one-to-one. A student would come to a teacher, and the teacher would essentially diagnose them. I can tell you have these proclivities, this type of constitution, your attention works in this way. These are the things we need you to do. And at that point, the teacher would determine, oh, I want you to do this type of breath work, not this. Your hips are very tight, but your spine is very straight. So you need to do these hip openers so you can sit for longer, but you don't need to do any back bends type of thing. There would be a diagnosis and then a specific curriculum given to the individual. And then what's also essential is that once that was completed, then that would continue to evolve. Once the student had mastered a certain breathwork technique, they wouldn't necessarily do that forever. Their constitution would have been brought into balance in a certain way, and then they would be moving on. Now, this individual teacher to individual student, many of us have heard that it's been passed on teachers to student for thousands of years. But this happened for thousands of years up until nobody knows exactly when, but from the sources I've seen, most likely around 1910, not much earlier, where at one point, for some reason, somehow no one has the exact historic point of this, but a teacher made a decision to teach yoga to more than one student at a time. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but in doing this, all of a sudden, instead of the yoga adapting to that individual, the two individuals would need to adapt to one sequence of yoga. Whereas the yoga was always adapting to the student's needs. If I'm teaching 3 students, 5 students, 20 students, last night I had almost 90 students, I can only teach one sequence. And that sequence can't be 90 individual sequences. That sequence needs to be one sequence that can sort of help everybody. And in that moment, and this is very recent, we say that yoga is this ancient tradition, but this method of teaching is very new comparatively, within the last 150 years at the most. So at that moment, a teacher is teaching one sequence to all of the students, and they now need to adapt to try to do the yoga rather than the yoga adapting to them. And in this way, these practices started to become homogenized. Now, of course, the value of this was that these practices could start to extend and be shared much more readily, and the practices of yoga started to expand and exchange, and that's how we have what we have today, is this method of pedagogy where a teacher can teach a sequence and so many people can do it and experience benefits for it. So that's what was gained. But what was lost, as I'm sure you can all understand, is the specificity of it. All of a sudden, I wasn't doing a yoga practice that would help, my shoulders or my this. I was basically doing something that would sort of be good for everyone. Now, in doing this, this created what I call sort of the contemporary model of the yoga class, a relatively new invention. And when this started to happen, teachers of yoga then changed from being essentially like diagnosing their students and giving them a prescriptive sequence that would ultimately serve their liberation. Teachers then became more of a performer. I'm in front of a group, I'm doing a performance, the group is watching me, they're doing what I say. And so even the role as someone doing the transmission changed. This then started to develop, each teacher started to develop their own styles and method of sharing these practices, right? So one teacher liked to do very quick sequences, one teacher wanted to spend more time on alignment. And over time, the teaching method evolved to its own, what I would call today, what we know of as a yoga style. So if any of you know anything about yoga styles, there's the Iyengar style, there's an Ashtanga style, there's a very new Vinyasa yoga style, there's all these things we call styles. But of course, none of that existed before the class, all very sort of new inventions. So as I said, a little bit what I think is lost in translation here is the precision. When a teacher is working with a student, they could tell the student exactly how long to hold one posture. This student needs to hold it for a different time. Student needs to do a practice at a different time of day. All of these specifics started to get lost as these sort of homogenized practices started to come into the West. And therefore, even though a teacher does their best to address individual needs of students in the class, the process is limited. There's only so much one can do to individualize that practice. Very often teachers, like I said it last night in class, do what you can, take care of yourself. Most people come to a yoga class, they don't know what that is. They don't know how to do it again. They don't know how to take care of themselves, because that essential form of teaching, of giving the background of it, has been lost. I do want to pause here, this is why I make these notes for myself, to say that while there's a lot that's lost here, there is a tremendous amount that is gained. And for the most part, the transmission of contemplative practices into Western culture, for the most part, it's been incredibly helpful to our community, to society. It's helping with a lot of things. So I don't want it to sound too heavy-handed here. But what I want to dive into now, and this is the part that I really get excited about, is to point out that the context of each of these practices is going to determine the efficacy of them. And that while much of this research has not been done yet, this is an opportunity for us in the future. These are research opportunities in the future that now that I've just completed my dissertation, I'm excited to be diving into. So let me get into some specifics. I'm going to point out a few challenges, and then I'm going to move to a few opportunities. In a lot of what I'm seeing in sort of contemporary Western healthcare, and even just a lot of psychology, I have a lot of friends who are psychologists. They have adapted a lot of the yoga, meditation, and breathing techniques. And as they share them with patients, they're describing them as relaxation and stress reduction techniques. And this is just what I sort of see in a lot of, just contemporary media. There seems to be an assumption that these techniques are sort of universally relaxing, that they are methods of calm. And in truth, this was not at all the intended purpose of, I'd say, hard to say a number, but maybe 75, 80% of these practices were not designed as relaxation techniques. In fact, they were designed as the complete opposite. Most contemplative practice As we know, we're done the moment the sun was rising, right? This is what they call the God's hour, the moment of physical yoga, breathwork, meditation. This was always done right first thing in the morning. So you wouldn't want to be doing a practice that's going to put you back to sleep. What would you do? If you were going to embody it, you would take your arms out and up and you would do, this is the creation of a sun salutation. It's an embodiment of the sun rising. It's meant to channel the element of fire and energy. So, for instance, as a good example, this is not something you would want to do right before bed, right? This isn't necessarily to wind you down. A lot of the yoga postures, physical standing postures, are meant to be quite energizing. The warrior postures, this is meant to evoke passages of the Bhagavad Gita and the warrior going into the battlefield of Dharma, facing the day, essentially. Energizing poses to get you ready. Now, just because something isn't relaxing doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not relaxing. It's meant to be energizing. It's meant to be focusing. It's meant to be strengthening. Also, very essential outcomes that we're all looking for. But some of these nuances are lost. How do we know which practices do what? So this is what I think we can start to dive into now. Okay, I already said that. So when I say energizing, it's sort of a vague, vague adjective. What I mean by an energizing pose is something that would elevate the heart rate, metabolic rate, core temperature, etc. Relaxing practices. What I mean by that is things that are slowing the body down, slowing respiration, etc. Relaxing and energizing are sort of, again, they're vague terms, they're not really specific, but this is sort of a starting basis for us to understand sort of which techniques do what for us. Neither is better, neither is worse. Just because it's energizing doesn't mean it's bad, but this is the type of thing we want to start to dive into. Now, I'm going to skip this part. Now, what I have spent my time doing is looking backwards, looking backward at all of these techniques and trying to understand how the source texts describe the purpose and the potential outcomes of these practices. But that's just what looking backward does. So I can look backwards and say, oh, I know that this breathing technique of Chandra Vedana, which we would call moon breath, something like this. I know that that is meant to be relaxing. But what we don't know is, practiced in isolation and measured, is it in fact so? So this is the type of thing I think we want to start to look at, and to not sort of assume the universality of this. So I'm going to get into the specifics of this. So let me start with, I'm going to break down a few things we might want to bring into consideration for physical yoga, for breathing techniques, and meditation techniques. Mostly, this is meant to ask you questions that you may not have thought of already. So when I think of a physical yoga practice, I have broken it down to, this is just my categorization. I break it down to these 5 variables. I think of a physical yoga practice in the sequence. When I say sequence, I mean the order of postures. Which posture comes first, which posture comes next, what posture do we end with? And the sequence with which we do a posture is going to greatly affect the outcome. Some people would do, here's a good example. So let's talk about, for instance, Janu Shirshasana is a seated forward bend, where you have one leg straight out in front of you and the other leg bent to the side, and you fold forward as just almost like a hamstring stretch. Most of us have done a stretch like this. Now, for many of us, we do a yoga class. That posture comes at the end of a full sequence, once the body is already very warmed up, done at the end, and usually very close to a Shavasana, final relaxation posture. So if it's done in that sequence, that posture might be considered a relaxing posture. However, in another tradition, the Ashtanga tradition, it's actually done much earlier in the sequence, and it's done in and out of these crazy, vinyasas, sun salutations. You do a full vinyasa, you sit down for just 5 breaths, and then you jump up and bounce around and do it again. And it actually shows up much earlier in the sequence, which is meant to be heating. So the sequence of the postures of when we do what is greatly going to determine what type of effect it has with us. And the other, of course, is just simply duration. Like I said, the Ashtanga sequence tradition, we hold a posture for 20 to 30 seconds. Very different than if we do, sort of a classic hatha technique, or even the newer yin yoga style, where we might hold a yoga posture one side for a minute, 2 minutes. Some people in a yin style class hold one pose for 5 minutes per side. That's going to have a very different effect on us, holding it a shorter amount of time. So when we're looking to measure these things, these are the type of things we want to start to keep in mind. Repetition as well. If we see, if we read a research paper and we see somebody wrote out a sequence of postures that were conducted, and for example, downward dog is part of that sequence. Did they really just do downward dog only one time? Because many yoga classes, again, like the one I taught last night, we did downward dog at least 15 times, something like this. So are we accurately chronicling how many repetitions per posture? The other one is breath pattern. Different traditions of yoga, again, once these styles started to develop with these different teachers doing their performances, they prescribe different breathing techniques. So in the Ashtanga style, Vinyasa style yoga, they prescribe an Ujjayi breath, which is a very specific breath by constricting the back of the throat, makes a hollow sound that's meant to happen for the duration of the practice, which would be completely different from an Iyengar breath technique, which would be different from the contemporary Kundalini style breath practice. So how we apply breath to whatever posture we're in, we're also greatly affected. And then also, one thing that I feel I'm really interested in people addressing in the future, we often have scales when we talk to, clinicians talk to their patients on a scale of 1 to 10. How painful would you say this is? Okay, well, maybe it's a 4, it's a 5, something like this. Self-report of scale. And intensity is something that we, as a practitioner, makes the determination on. Traditionally, in an Iyengar seated forward bend, a very intense experience. The foot is flexed, you're pressing the leg down. It has to be exactly this way. Your spine has to be like this. You've got all these directions to follow, and all of the muscles are meant to be engaged. It's incredibly safe. It's incredibly effective. It's a wonderful practice. But it's often not at all relaxing. The intensity of which we as a practitioner apply to a posture, we can kind of turn the volume up or we can turn the volume down. And as we do that, this is going to be another essential component to measuring the effect of yoga sequence, yoga posture. So just briefly, if we wanted to talk about sequencing, if I started my practice on the floor and ended up standing, that would be a great way to get ready for the day. If I started a yoga practice standing and I end with a long relaxation in Shavasana, well, I probably wouldn't want to do that at 7 in the morning right before I have to go to work. So these are the type of things we want to start to keep in mind. So I talked a lot about this. I'm going to move on. Talked about this as well. Even sometimes people break down what we would call asana families or family postures. Back bends considered to be energizing postures. Forward bends are considered to be more relaxing. And some of this is true, but just kind of want to highlight that a real area for future research is to actually really start to measure all this. If back bends are done supported, like if you do a back bend over a chair, over a bolster, and you're there for some time and you relax, it could be a relaxing experience. So even these asana families are not sort of ubiquitously either relaxing or energizing. So just a few of the postures. This is part of what I was working on in my dissertation, was through historical text, trying to determine Sun Tzu's warrior postures, standing postures. Some of the postures that the texts say were energizing. Obviously, a good example are the balancing postures. If you are doing a handstand without any support and you're afraid you might fall down on your face, that's not going to be a relaxing experience, but it's beautifully focusing and energizing and strengthening. So I think you guys get the sort of reiterating this. These are some of the relaxation postures. Can you all tell that I moved from Los Angeles to the Bay Area because of my obsession with images of fog? All I have is images of fog. I'm so happy to be here. I've just got a few minutes left here. I'd like to just go over a few of the nuances with breath work, and then a few of the nuances with meditation. Again, not to be heavy-handed, but to hopefully bring up some, points of consideration. I'm going to skip over this because I'm running out of time. Just like physical yoga postures, breathwork techniques, we call these pranayama techniques, also have incredibly varied nuances, which I believe that much of which has kind of been lost in this translation. A wonderful example is a technique that's called Samravrti, which is a balanced 4-part breathing. It's wonderful within the last 5 years. This has all of a sudden come into the zeitgeist. I see it on YouTube. I see it on Instagram. People are doing it, and today they're calling it box breathing. And for the most part, this has just been beneficial. I don't really know that it's really hurting anybody. But when we do breath retentions, that experience is not necessarily calming for all people. Doing breath retentions can create all sorts of experiences. Samavriti is basically pretty balanced, so for the most part, it's a relatively safe one that's come into the zeitgeist. But other breathing techniques that became popular, like in the Kundalini tradition, the Kapalabhati breath or Bhastrika breath, what we call breath of fire or bellows breath, these are very energizing and heating techniques. And for instance, we wouldn't want to suggest one of these techniques to our patients or our students if we were wanting to have them relax. If the goal is stress reduction or anxiety reduction, perhaps that would not be the best breathwork technique to suggest. Again, I have learned and studied this from historical text, but what I'm really excited about is the opportunity to start to study this through our contemporary research methods. So for instance, if there were a study that were to measure a person's going to do 10 minutes of breath work every single day for 30 days. So the question first would be, well, which type of breath work? Are they going to do alternate nostril breathing, Nadi Shodhana, or are they going to do like a straw breath? Which technique are they doing? Obviously, we'd want to isolate that variable. And we'd also want to determine what time of day were they doing that breathwork technique. And what I would also suggest is that there is certain value of just stopping for 10 minutes to dedicate oneself to breath. So rather than having the control group simply be someone that didn't do breathwork technique at all, we would want to contrast that to a different breathwork technique that was also practiced for 10 minutes a day for 30 days, etc. And therefore really see, oh, well, this one did this one did this. I bring this up, I saw in doing my lit review for the dissertation, I read a study about some yoga practices that were performed with students as a method for sleep. And when I looked at the sequence, to me, it looked like a very energizing sequence, but the research demonstrated that it was effective for sleep. And what made me ask the question of, well, is this actually better for sleep, or was it just the fact that people took that time to stretch and breathe? Would it have been anything that would have been helpful for sleep? What if we contrasted it with a slower, more relaxing sequence? Which one was better for sleep? So these are the things that I've been asking myself. These are a few energizing breath practices. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about, I want to open up a can of worms for about meditation techniques. And again, to keep in mind, meditation practice was developed and evolved for purposes of spiritual liberation. That was the only goal for thousands of years. And it's wonderful that these practices have been adapted and they're being used for all sorts of outcomes these days, for sports performance, for productivity, for different types of pain management, and been incredibly effective in this translation. And I guess they would call this, like in the world of tech, they would call this is sort of version one of meditation is going to be helpful to us. And in moving forward, I would invite us to start to get clarity on which types of meditation techniques provide which outcomes. Somebody doing a visualization technique, whether it's visualize yourself in your happy place on a beach, or visualize a chakra system in a body, or visualize the ball going into the hoop, or visualize yourself going to the end zone. That type of meditation is going to have a vastly different effect on our system than a repetition of a mantra, which was originally a sacred sound, and then contemporary culture, we're translating this into like modern day affirmations, like I am healthy, I am peaceful. None of this is harmful, but I'm just saying there shouldn't be an assumption that this will do this. Practice of mindfulness is also really worth examining. A traditional Buddhist mindfulness, for instance, I think it's like the 5 obstacles to mindfulness, and sleep is one of the obstacles to mindfulness. So while mindfulness has been incredibly helpful for sleep, we would want to look at what parts of the meditation are helpful, what parts, it's just a little bit more complex than that. My favorite example of some of this lost in translation is the practice of Yoga Nidra, which is actually what started me on my journey of this. When I was about 9 years old, I developed a extremely severe chronic insomnia when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I started to do some Yoga Nidra type practices when I was young. And the Yoga Nidra practices did not help me sleep. I was told, listen to this is going to help you sleep. And they actually did not help me sleep at all. But I started to have some very unusual experiences of alternate forms of consciousness, like as a kid, which spurred my interest in these traditions. That's been wonderful. But the practice of Yoga Nidra was developed specifically to stay awake. Yoga Nidra was created with the very clear purpose is that humans identify relaxation with falling asleep, and they identify being awake with tension. Yoga Nidra was created so that one could lie down and intentionally relax themselves to a point of very deep relaxation while maintaining an awareness during this relaxation, and to move to alternate forms of consciousness. In fact, when I first started doing it in classes and with teachers, you'd get in trouble if you fell asleep. Now, of course, decades ago, somebody realized, hey, well, that may be the case, but it's really helping people fall asleep. So now it's being used for insomnia, and that's wonderful. It is really helping people. I'm so happy to see its popularity. But if there is somebody who's struggling with insomnia and they find that Yoga Nidra is actually not helping them fall asleep, maybe even creating anxiety because they're just kind of lying there, we should not invalidate their experience. In fact, we should just move into more research about these outcomes. I am pretty much at the end of my 45 minutes here. Oh, I just want to take one last moment to criticize my own work. which I've been trained is essential. I did a study here with my students at USC. We measured outcomes before and after my class. My dissertation, I wrote, had a final sample size of 238, where we measured outcomes before and after a credit course that I taught on sleep at USC. And while I saw many benefits to the class I was teaching, I saw measured improvement of sleep. Again, what I don't know, because I didn't have any funding, I was just kind of doing this on my own, with USC's team. I don't know which posture helped. I don't know whether it was simply taking the time to dedicate to self-care that helped sleep, or which part did what. So in criticizing my own work, my goal is in the future to start to get more specific about all of this, with the goal of being of service. I'm going to sort of stop my PowerPoint here. To just kind of end at the point of it, I'm passionate about all of this because I'm passionate about helping people. And I know and believe that these techniques are really effective and that they really work. And I feel like the opportunity now is for we as researchers to start to get more clarity and to work on sort of diving into the therapeutic specificity of all of this in the future. So thank you so much for listening to all of this, and I really welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ivanhoe. That was a fantastic talk. And there's one question in the chat that I'll make sure we come to. Also, if people who've asked in the chat would prefer to raise their hands and speak, that's welcome too. But let's start with an in-person question. Philippe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of what you just said. It's so interesting. I just wrote several of the comments that you just verbalized right now in a review of a paper. And the only other things, the only thoughts, so yes, I appreciate everything you're saying. Specificity, because I think that's what's holding us back in advancing the clinical science of contemplative practice altogether. Just a couple of things. One is I also, ethics, the ethics and values and intentionality of why I do any kind of contemplative practice. That's on the front side. And then the other part is the relationship with the teacher, right? How impactful that is, and working alliance, and I mean I've studied that in the context of mindfulness-based stress reduction, et cetera, and compassion training. And I just want to say thank you for all this, and I really hope that you, in combination with all of us and many others, can just bring the science into much greater detail. Because I think even like MBSR, which component of it is it? Just showing up with 6 to 30 people? Is that the active component, right? Which kind of practice or combinations thereof? So I completely agree with you. I think that, yeah, I'll pause. Much more to be said.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you. Yeah.
Let's take a question from Florentine and then Francis.
Hi, sorry, I'm in my garage. This is so cool research, and it kind of like hits close to home because I'm a first-time mom, and I got laid off from my UCSF job, and I used to be a cancer researcher, but being a mom sort of like changed my perspective. Like, can we use yoga and meditation to sort of like prevent all the complications from all the side effects? Like, what is your opinion on that? I would love to know.
Yeah, I think it's a real area for investigation. While there may be some potentials for it to mitigate the side effects, it can also help to address our experience of the side effects. And these are two different things. And so I think we're at the beginning of that. And What I'm really excited about is when I started teaching yoga 30 years ago, these were not widely accepted techniques. We're still living in a, you know, we're still living in a world where some of it was, there was a lot of fear. Oh, is this a religious thing, or is this, a weird woo-woo thing? So the good news is we've made enough progress to get to this point, and now our ability to do research has just become so much more refined. So I think these are all the questions we want to be asking.
Thank you so much for the talk. That was really great. And I, just based on my own experience with meditation and going through some of these programs, it's really nice to see the direction of sort of, contextualizing them and seeing what they're intended to do. The thing I was wondering is, have you been in touch with and dialogue with any of the researchers who are working on meditation adverse events, like Willoughby Britton's lab? Because
no, I'm not. Find that very interesting. Would you send me, if you have some information on that? I would really love to hear more about that.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's really interesting work, and it is striking to me that it has, when I read it, I see them making a point of being as methodologically airtight as possible, because they have gotten immense criticism.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, this is sort of why I think it's valuable for us to start to, at some point, examine which type of meditation technique, and to keep in mind that, for millennia, it was taught a certain way to a certain type of person for a certain reason. So I know for me, I've been doing a meditation practice for over 40 years. For me, I really struggle with a mindfulness practice. If I try to follow the directions of mindfulness as I understand it, I just get so confused. I've been doing a mantra practice for, almost every day for 35 years, which I find incredibly effective for me, but somebody else might find that boring. So it's worth, as a clinician works with a patient, even, for instance, prescribing some sort of an SSRI, you try something out on a patient. Oh, that doesn't work. It has the wrong effect. So you stop that and try something else. But because our Western practitioner we don't know as much about what we are teaching to our students and patients, there's a little bit of a gap there, and I think a real opportunity.
Agree. Thank you so much.
One of the questions in the chat is from Jane, asking, to what extent is it useful to start a session asking attendees what their goals are?
I really love hearing that. Yes, I think it's incredibly useful. However, the answers may provide challenging, right? So if I hear from different people that they have different goals, I'm once again put in that position that we talked about. Rather than if I have one person, what their goal is, I can work to whatever encyclopedia I have of the outcomes of these practices. I can work to try to pull out of my brain which technique to meet their goal. But if I have a group of people and they have different goals, that will be difficult for me to do in one session. One of the things I think will be interesting for us to start to, maybe as a community, start to create, is educating our students and patients. We don't need to use the breakdown that I created about the duration and intensity and sequence, etc. That was just one framework that might work. But if I have a group of students and they all have different goals, and I'm going to teach one sequence, but they have been educated that they can dial it up or dial it down, that they can change their breath work, that they can change their intensity within a sequence, that then gives them some individual autonomy to be able to guide and direct the practice towards their individual need. What I often do in lieu of that is I'll always invite, if I'm doing a group, I'll invite them to take a moment for their personal intention. And then I will also simultaneously say, that's what you're here for personally. And then I will create something for the group together so that I can get the group kind of aligned and headed in one direction. So last night we were working on doing a physical asana practice, but keeping the breath very smooth in every movement, so that there's at least, it does help to have a unified vision as well, to kind of get everyone to ride in the same direction. So these are the great questions.
I'm going to ask a question, maybe a little bit related to that from the chat, and then go back to some more. John is asking, if a clinician is prescribing yoga to a patient, what are the basic warnings that should be given regarding the potential adverse effects, i.e. informed disclosure?
Right. Yeah, this is exactly the stuff to be considering. I think it's going to greatly depend on the context of what we are prescribing for. If I'm prescribing this for a patient who has a knee injury, then I would give them guidelines about postures to avoid, certain movements that the knee can and can't do, certain movements that will be helpful to that, and ways to work around it. If I'm prescribing yoga for anxiety relief, things we might want to keep in mind is, like, just from a practical sense, class size. Many people come into a big crowded class and it can give them anxiety. But some people go into a big crowded class and it makes them feel like they're in community. One thing, for instance, for anxiety that I think is just anecdotally something that I see as a big miss is that often younger teachers will invite their students, they'll say, breathe, breathe. And people feel like, I'm trying. And they already feel like they're full of breath, and then trying to gasp and gulp more breath in an already full lungs that can create a problem, that can create more anxiety. So giving a little bit more instruction about that. So I think, as we start to invite our others to do these practices, just to sort of get a little bit more clarity on what is it that we're trying to achieve with them, what are their goals, what are our goals for them, and maybe just starting very simply, rather than saying, oh, try some breath work, giving them one technique, try it out for a certain duration, see how they feel, and then moving from there. Yes, I'm looking at this. Wouldn't it be useful to provide a pamphlet? Yes, let's do that. I want to write one. Here it says in the chat, explaining the different types of yoga, the various practices. Another thing to just, I don't know why this popped into my mind, is, yoga is one of the only physical practices that is largely dependent on inverted practices. You're upside down. So some people say, oh, I do yoga and I get an upset stomach. Well, if you eat and then go upside down, that will be a problem. So just little things like that, we can start to work together to start to create some guidelines.
A broader question in the chat from Sarah Patterson, who says, thank you for a beautiful talk. I'm curious how you think about the tension between the fact that these contemplative practices did originate in a religious context and what seems to be an important need to separate them from religion to use them in healthcare settings.
This is the question. I can't tell you how many decades I've been having this conversation of sort of like yoga, Buddhism, and Hinduism, and like, where do these circles overlap? One of the primary distinctions that's discussed often in this, and obviously may not be saying anything you don't already know. There are more devotional traditions of yoga that we learn about in the Bhagavad Gita that are very sort of devotional, could be considered having a religious context to it. But the Hatha Yoga texts, Hatha Yoga Pratipika, Dattatraya Yoga Shastra, the Hatha texts really focus on the asceticism, and they do honor the lineage of teacher. And they do talk about moksha, but they aren't talking about a deity. There isn't any sort of deity worship. One of the big ones that's contested is in the Yoga Sutra, whereas most of the Yoga Sutra, for those of you that are new to it, Yoga Sutra is sort of the foundational text of philosophy of yoga. It's 196 verses, 4 chapters, and it's mostly a methodology of what to do to achieve yoga. And many scholars make the argument that in the Yoga Sutra, it does not declare that you need to have any worship of a deity. There does not need to be a religious context. There's one verse which is about Ishvara Pranidhana, which is worshiping of something greater than yourself. So other scholars argue that because there's something in there that says that you have to worship something greater than yourself, that it is a religious text. But I think for me, the balance that I have found is that I'm very interested in understanding all of these points of view, and that to be of most service, I make a determination based on my students. I make a determination based on whoever it is I'm trying to help. And if I see that they aren't open to any of this information in religious context, I usually leave it out and just allow the practice to speak for itself. Very often in doing the practice, people will have an experience and a different direction. But I don't think that it's my job to proselytize that in any way. So I try to walk the balance, but I can't say that I always do it perfectly.
Thank you for such a thoughtful answer.
Thank you so much. We are at the end of the hour, so I know some people will need to go. There are a couple of other questions. I don't know if you have a few minutes and want to stay on and answer those or not, but okay,
Sure.
Great. And somebody asking how they might contact you if they want to ask follow-up questions. So if you want to share information in the chat, feel free.
Yes, for
But
sure.
for everybody who needs to
give
get
you-
off, we'll just thank you so much for this fantastic, really thoughtful, thought-provoking talk. And thanks to everyone for being here today. And if you want to stay for a last couple of questions for 5 more minutes, feel free to stay on. So I know, Kenneth, I see your raised hand, and then I'll find the other question in the chat after you're done.
Hi, hello, Dr. Ivanhoe. Thank you for a great talk. Also, in line with Sarah's, what was her the question that was just asked. The other side of that, of course, is the I know the term that people talk would say appropriation of yoga, using it in a secular context. And that's not the issue I'm really necessarily bringing up, but some people might say that now that it's brought into kind of health context, it's becoming more kind of secularized and seen as exercise, when its origin was more, well, not even, let's say, religious, but say mystical. And so even in the context of talking about this is a religious tradition, but it's also a tradition with like metaphysics that aren't necessarily like sound science or proven by science, or using the scientific method. So one is, I think I wanted to compliment you because of the work that you're doing seems to not just also say like, listen, this isn't just exercise. There's other things like breathing. There's other things about like the routine and the lifestyle and things like that that actually fill in that gray area that would separate it from like just being religious or metaphysical or exercise in a secular way. So I think that maybe what's happening is more of this kind of more of the yoga research like you're doing is kind of giving like filling in that gray area that separates the two. But I guess the ultimate question though is it possible to really fully utilize yoga without being connected to even these metaphysical theories, whether it's prana or like these different like chakras and kundali and all that? How effective or is it I guess it's always a balance of trying to ride that line to try to keep the two together, to bridge it together. But it seems like the intent of those practices are to ultimately connect to those metaphysical ideas.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it into this conversation because I think it's really important. I had a few things pop into my mind that I'll just share. One of them is when I started teaching physical yoga classes. I started in 95, and I think it was 1997. They opened a Crunch gym on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, and I went up and I said, "Hey, you're opening a gym, and I think you should let me teach a yoga class." And they were like, "Well, what is this? Isn't that stretching?" And I was like, "No, yoga's going to be big. I swear. Just give me a chance." And I talked them into letting me have a class when nobody really knew what it was at that point. And I taught class after class after class I just kept showing up to an empty room. Nobody came. It was a gym. Why would they come to yoga? And I was like, I need to do something. So I can't believe the gall I had in my early 20s, but I went up to people who were lifting weights. I grabbed people on the treadmill and I was like, "Hey, come I dragged them in." And they did not have the intention of any spiritual practice. They didn't come in with the hopes of any of this. I dragged them in from their exercise routine with the sort of blind faith that if they just through repetition, and repetition of the name, repetition of the posture, just through the repetition, might they then retroactively start to have an experience simply through the practice itself. And many of them didn't, and they went back to lifting weights. But many of them, just simply from trying it, then found themselves on the path of inquiry. And in that moment, I saw the opportunity of, rather than sort of needing to start with the intention and then progressing through the practice in this way, that there were many avenues and many paths, and we call these margas, the different paths of the mountain, that I basically at that moment decided I didn't want to judge somebody's intention or reason for coming. It was my job to offer the experience and then to see how much they wanted to adopt. So I don't have a perfect answer to the question, but that's one of the ways that I've tried to navigate it.
Thank you.
Would you be so kind as to put your email address in?
Oh, yes. So I just put one in the chat. I gave you my Sara Ivanhoe at Gmail because
maybe just went to me. I can copy
oh,
it if you
sorry
want to
about
share it with
that.
everybody.
Okay,
No,
thank
no,
you.
no problem. No problem.
Institutions are changing a lot these days, so I've just realized that it's better to give you my private email address because you never know. World has changed a lot in this last year. So
I also wondered if you could make this presentation available since we skipped over several segments.
oh, you mean some of the slides? Yes, I got ambitious.
Can you send us a copy of the PowerPoint?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much for your interest.
Yeah, I think
I already signed my life away, so.
No, I think your analysis is very useful. And I think most people don't understand unless it's explained to them like you just did, and that it would be a useful presentation. That's why I said, could you do a pamphlet, an introduction that instructors could use, because there are people all over the place that are teaching yoga, and who knows what expectation they come in with. But if you can state, here are the options of how we could be teaching this, and we may do it in segments. You know, class on X date is on this part, class on Y date is on that part. Or if you're interested in them all, come to them all, or divide a given class into segments. I mean, there are different ways of handling it, as there are very many different instructors. And do you also deal with the area where people want to explore their consciousness? Use yoga the traditional way for which it was created and developed. Do you do that?
I do. And in fact, I was just about to, it was perfect timing. I was just about to invite you all. I'm here at Stanford Memorial Church, and I teach a candlelight yoga class here in the church Monday nights from 5:30 to 6:30. It is open and free to everyone, students, faculty, staff, community, people at other institutions. And when I teach a yoga class for credit, I do one thing. If I'm teaching a yoga class for therapeutic outcome, I do one thing. But when we do our practice here in the church, I do it with the intention of sanctuary, since we're here in this sort of sacred space. So I bring in concepts of the philosophy, and that's really my favorite.
Yeah, I was curious as to which one you prefer to practice with people.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's my favorite. My favorite is to not talk too much and to, through our practice, ask some questions and to leave a lot of room for silence for people to, we're just living in a world with so much noise right now, so much noise, so much information. So I love the classes I do here at the church, and hopefully you all will make the drive down from UCSF and please come visit us at Stanford.
We're in Arcata.
Oh, okay.
It's a rather long trip.
Yeah, that is. It sure is.
Yeah. It might be interesting for you to do a session in this particular venue that would be available to people all over.
Sure, yeah. I really liked some of the ideas you chronicled, so please do take my email address, and if you write some of that up. Now that I've just finished my PhD, I'm excited to dive into what's next. So all of these ideas are this is my life.
In case you don't have anything to do, I put together the Ollie at Cal Poly Brown Bag Lunch Program, which are free to open to the public, 1.5 hour presentations. And I'd like to have you consider what you'd like to put together for something like that. I'm way ahead of the summer. I just finished the spring one, setting it up.
Great.
But
thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is a fantastic talk, and really glad to have everyone here engagement. I, for one, have to leave the room that I'm in a minute.
Of course. Ariana, thank you so much for having and facilitating.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to meet you. Thanks for being here. Thanks, everyone. And please reach out the email at her email address.